Hello, hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back. I'm Antoinette van Graan, and this week we will be reviewing Frankenstein by Mary Shelley. So, I'm just gonna tell you how the book opens, and then we'll know where we are. It starts with a man completely alone, complaining to himself about his utter loneliness. There's no other human beings to talk to, not another living soul on the ship. The ship full of sailors. Because, excuse me, sailors aren't human beings because they are not high class individuals. This is what we're dealing with. From that, we know that this was maybe a book from a couple of years ago. It's a gothic thriller. So from here we can get the style. It is very sophisticated. The upper echelons of society will completely feel at home and identify with these characters and the rich prose that's used. It is nice. It's pretty. It's very flowery, very extravagant, but it has a luxury to it that you can only get from books from this time. It's not really used in modern literature. The pacing is really good here. There's very little foreshadowing, and then bam, another big thing happens. And I think that has a lot to do with how this book was written. Mary Shelley and her husband, fiance, at that time, the famous poet Shelley, the one everybody really cares about, they were in like a little cabin in the woods, that's how I remember it, hiding away from the authorities, and they had a little writing competition amongst themselves, and they just wanted to see who could write the best novel in the time that they had spending there doing nothing before TV. So in that time, Mary Shelley wrote this glorious novel, and I think that's why there's very little foreshadowing and there's a lot of quick-paced events, because she didn't have something grand to say necessarily. She just was writing for fun. And I think it shows in how quickly things happen and how there doesn't seem to be much of a plan, but everything happens organically, and it makes it seem much more real and much more heartfelt than other gothic novels that I have read. Gothic is not one of my favorite genres, but this is definitely my favorite of the genre that I have read. So, sugar and vinegar. Sugar is definitely Frankenstein's monster. So just by the way, the monster is not called Frankenstein. Frankenstein is the professor who built, constructed, and gave life to the monster. So Frankenstein is daddy, and then Frankenstein's monster never gets a name because nobody ever loves him. And he's my favorite. I love him. I will be there for you, my monster. He's a sweetheart. He's really heartfelt. He's really sincere, and you can really identify with him in his struggle to fit in and to figure out life and society, and why does he exist if nobody's going to love him, and if people exist to be loved, why does he exist? He's just a sweetheart. And then Frankenstein, daddy, he was the vinegar. I really hated him. He's stuck up, pretentious, vain, just an awful human being. And I guess he makes a good villain, but we're from his perspective, so we have to listen to a lot of melodrama. Just about the perils of living a privileged life, and it's annoying. So the parts where we're in Frankenstein himself, his perspective, they're not great, especially before the monster comes into play. I'd much rather be in the monster's mind where things make more sense and things are more realistic and more grounded. Yes. So, would I recommend Frankenstein? Yes and no. On the one hand, it's a classic. It really makes you think, it's philosophical, it's deep, it's interesting, the characters are good. It's a good antagonist, it's a good protagonist, and it's a tragic ending. And I really love this book. 4 stars, by the way. Would I recommend it? So, yes, this is the no. It's a gothic novel, so if you're not ready for this, not level of prose, but like melodrama in the prose, I wouldn't recommend. And then there's also a lot of intertextuality here. This book's full title is Frankenstein, a Modern Prometheus. So that already implies that you know about Greek mythology, who Prometheus was, that he stole fire to give to man, um, and all the stories around him. And then there's a lot of notions about Icarus and flying too close to the sun, and that melting your wings so you can fall to the ground again. And that's the story about vanity from a Greek perspective. So if you are prepared for all the intertextuality and additional reading that this will take to understand fully and to get all the nuances, if you're ready for that, I say 100% go for it. If you don't want to do all the additional reading, I think you can enjoy the novel without it, but you are missing a bit. So yeah, I'm gonna put it up to you, depending on what you want. It is a thriller. It was a horror in the time. I don't think it would count as a horror today, just because our standards for the grotesque have been lifted by so much. We have much more gory, much more terrifying imagery to work with today than they had thought suitable to be put down in the written form. So I don't think it would be a horror of today, but it definitely was a horror of the time. And it's a good read. I don't say this about many gothic novels, but I enjoyed this one. And I would actually reread it at a time, because melodrama aside, the ideas discussed in here and the character of Frankenstein's monster, something that will always stay with me. So then we'll get into spoilers. So I know most of you think you know the story. Frankenstein creates a monster using the marvel of electricity. Not exactly how it happens though. But that's the least interesting part. The least interesting part of the story is the creation of the monster. The monster's journey, and then the relationship between Daddy Frankenstein and Frankenstein's monster. That's the interesting bit. To do this properly, I'm going to do the character of Frankenstein, then the plot, because Frankenstein's character starts the plot, and then I'll do the character of the monster, because the monster's character ends the plot, drives the plot, causes the tragic, horrific ending that makes this novel a kind of a body thriller of its time. So let's deal with Daddy Frankenstein. He has a god complex that he just believes that biology and its innate characteristics should be completely at the disposal of man. Would definitely have been a eugenicist, just fascinated with life and death, but extremely vain. Certain features of life are acceptable and valuable and beautiful, and other are iffy and deserve to die. And then he has this really annoying habit of becoming gravely ill whenever things are a bit tough. He doesn't have a blue Monday. He has the flu for a month. He just, whenever anything is a bit tough on him, heartbreak is like disease for 2 years. He's very sickly, but it seems onsetterig. I don't think it's real. You can't become this ill from failing at school. It's melodramatic and really frustrating. Other than that, he's an intellectual, bit socially awkward. He doesn't have a lot of friends, but I wouldn't want to be friends with him either. But his main thing is his vanity. That's the most important part of him, and the god complex that comes with that. His whole point in creating Frankenstein was creating the most beautiful being that ever lived. and being able to create it himself, which makes him the creator, the provider of the most beauty that ever lived. And it's, as aspirations go, it's not great. Okay, so then we get into the plot. So Frankenstein is obsessed with the ideas of life and death, and especially the beauty of both of these. And he starts studying, and he studies biology, and he studies chemistry, and he studies here and there and everywhere. Of course, he doesn't have to work. His family's rich enough for that. And he becomes fascinated with how to create life. He fails a lot and takes a lot of naps because of those failures, month-long naps. And then finally, he has this grand idea, and he robs the graves of the most beautiful people and takes all their prettiest bits. So he takes the legs of athlete and the arms of this, and he gathers together the most beautiful bits of the most beautiful people. Once again, this vanity. And he assembles them, and he basically sews them together with his skills in anatomy and biology. And when they all lie there constructed, he thinks, what a beautiful creature am I going to create? And of course, he creates life, and then the monster of Frankenstein is born, and he hates it. Monstrous, grotesque. He's disgusted by his own creation, because he thought putting together all these beautiful bits would create something beautiful, but it didn't. It created a monster. And Frankenstein immediately flees from his own creation, leaving the monster there, basically a newborn, with the strength of a man, alone and confused and very disorientated because Daddy just ran away. And he flees, and he goes on hiatus and needs to take a break because of this failure, and how completely upset he was by what he had the indignity of seeing. And then we get to see things from the monster's perspective, and he's struggling. He really is. So the monster's really struggling. He goes through almost his own little coming of age story. He finds himself abandoned, unlovable, alone in the world, and he somehow teaches himself how to read and how to speak, and he starts contemplating life because he has all this time alone. And after some time, he escapes the doctor's offices, and he finds a copy of Paradise Lost, a poem about man's contemplation about the point of existence and why did God create me if only to suffer, and that type of stuff. It's obviously a long poem with a lot in it, but the monster sees this and he starts thinking, but why was I created if not to be loved? And he tries to fit in, and he tries to make friends, but obviously his rotting corpses come alive, and he's kind of terrifying, especially for the people of that time, when there was a legit fear that corpses would come to life and wreak havoc and get their vengeance for whatever you've done. So obviously this was not a good time for him to be alive. And he spies on a rural family, and he shows a lot of kindness towards them, and when you're in his mind, his thoughts are sincere and kind and loving, and you're just like, oh baby, you're a baby. So he figures that no human could love him, so he needs one like himself. And this is kind of what he gets from the Paradise Lost and the creation story. If Adam had Eve, then Frankenstein's monster deserves a friend as well. So he goes on a hunt, and he searches for Daddy. And Daddy Frankenstein literally doesn't care anymore. He's just glad that he came back to his offices and the grotesque was gone. Doesn't care what became of him. And Frankenstein's monster asks him, please create a woman for me. He wants a friend, he wants a companion, he wants a woman. Just like Adam had Eve, he also wants his partner, because then he can be loved, because he can love her and she can love him. And Frankenstein refuses. He regrets his decision of creating life, and he chases the monster away. And at first the monster doesn't know how to deal with this. And then after some time, after begging Frankenstein again and again, and Frankenstein just being a general asshole about it all, like the most horrible absentee father that ever there lived, just refuses to give his creation any solace, any companionship at all. And then Daddy Frankenstein marries, and Frankenstein's monster takes vengeance by killing his wife, and then chasing him down for the rest of his days, making him fear and suffer, just like Frankenstein's monster himself has been chased out from every place he has been, every person he's trying to introduce himself to, every friend he's tried to make, he's been chased out, and so he is now chasing his father down for the rest of his existence to kind of get back at him, because there's nothing else for him to do. There is no happily ever after. There is no place where he can be happy. There's no situation where he will be safe because of his nature. So the monster as a character is the one I identified with most because of his groundedness. He's very intelligent, not intellectual per se, but intelligent, down to earth, heartfelt, sincere, grounded, just humble and naive. But he is a literal baby at the beginning, like in his mind. He can walk and things, but he's like a baby deer, and then he somehow teaches himself how to read. But he really goes through his own sort of Bildungsroman, coming of age story within this. So in childhood, he finds himself abandoned, and he seeks a place for him to fit in, for him to be loved. And he doesn't find this. So, again, better than most of us would have done, he goes out and he searches further. He searches for more. Maybe this book says man needs a woman. I'm man. Let me ask my creator to create me a woman as well. This must have been an oversight on his part. And he does a very rational thing and asks for what he believes to be the key to happiness. Like, hi master, you just kind of forgot about me, but I need to, I exist now. I need to keep existing. So, because how do you kill something that was dead? But so can you help me out here? Just, I'll go away. I'll leave everybody alone. Just give me a friend. And Frankenstein refuses. And then he loses his shit. He murders the wife of Frankenstein, and he doesn't know what to do anymore. So his only option is revenge, and he takes that revenge into adulthood, and it's his mission in life to make his master fear and suffer, to make Daddy Frankenstein fear and suffer the way he has suffered all his life. So yeah, good character, very relatable arc, and just somebody who sticks with you. It's a complicated plan, but once again, if this was the foundation text you're working off of, is the creation story and the stories described in Paradise Lost, the poem, how do you go from there? So I think it's really good what Shelley did. It's very rational, the way that Frankenstein thinks about life, because this is all he has. This is all he has to hold on to. And he's never had any guidance from anywhere. All he has had is hatred. And he's turned out pretty well, considering. So then there's the big thing of calling Frankenstein's monster a monster. I'm not a fan of calling him that. He doesn't have a name, so there's nothing else for me to call him. But I think he's more grotesque than monstrous. The differences between these are, the grotesque is ugly, horrific, but deserves our pity. The monstrous is ugly, grotesque, but the inside kind of mirrors the outside. And in the time of the Gothic novel, if you are ugly from the outside, it must be a reflection from what is within. But I think from our more modern ways of thinking about things, Quasimodo is a good example of another grotesque figure. So this book made me question a lot of things. Am I vain? Would I have been Frankenstein's friend? I don't know. And that's kind of scary. Because I'd like to say, yes, I'd be friends with anyone and anything. But if you reek like a corpse and you're mangled bits of other people put together, would I give you the time of day? Would I be scared? Would that be rational? I don't know. And luckily, I don't think too many people would really blame me for not knowing, because it's terrible. It's really terrible. And if you don't know that this is not a monster, I don't know. Obviously, I'm not nearly as vain as Frankenstein himself. I'm not trying to create life to stroke my own ego. But am I completely devoid of this sin? Probably not. So, yeah, that was Frankenstein. And I know you guys comment, but you never actually answer my questions in the comments. So let's try this one. Do you think you could be the friend of Frankenstein's monster? Do you think you could be Frankenstein's friend? Okay, comments below, like, subscribe. See you next week. Bye bye.